Hi, ladies and gentlemen. It's Miss Corcoran coming at you. We're going to be talking about evolution of populations today. This is the third section of chapter 21. And as a review from our video about the mice coloration in the Southwest deserts, convergent evolution is the term that is used to describe when two unrelated species converge on a similar trait because of the selective pressures in the environment. The trait in that video was dark coloration, and it evolved separately and independently on two different lava flows, resulting in convergent evolution. Okay, so in section 3 of chapter 21 in your book, it talks about the three major factors that alter allele frequencies. So we've learned how to calculate the allele frequencies, but what is it that's going to be the main driving force to change those allele frequencies? And the first one is natural selection. This is the selective pressure in the environment saying this trait is fit and the other one is not, and I'm going to select against it. It results in differential reproductive success, and over time, good fit genes will accumulate in a population. Genetic drift is a new concept for all of you who are sophomores, because we didn't get to it in our evolution unit last year. And for juniors and seniors, it's been a while. So genetic drift is random events that affect small populations that cause the allele frequencies to change, not because one allele was more fit for the environment or another. It's just random stuff. If you'll remember, one of the first criteria for Hardy-Weinberg was a very large population. This is necessary because small populations are subject to genetic drift that have nothing to do with fitness. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Under the umbrella of genetic drift, there are two other terms you need to know called bottleneck effect and founder effect, and we've got slides for those. Gene flow also alters allele frequency. Do you remember when we first started talking about this, I had the picture of the purple bugs and the brown bugs, and one purple bug immigrated over to the brown bug population, and he is certainly going to change the allele frequency of that population. So getting to genetic drift, imagine that we're sampling somebody's backyard. And they've got a wide variety of flowers. They've got white flowers and pink flowers and red flowers. And a really mean motorcycle person drives their motorcycle through their backyard. And by chance, not because they're more fit than others, only 5 flowers survive. And the flowers that survive are going to be a red one, a white one, a pink one, and another pink one. And these reproduce. And the next generation, we've got some variation here, and that darn motorcyclist rides through the field again, okay, killing quite a lot of flowers. In fact, only 2 survive this time. 2 red flowers survive, such that the third generation reflects only red flowers and not the same kind of diversity the original population had. It doesn't mean red flowers were more fit for the backyard. It means red flowers just happened to survive when the mean motorcyclist rode through there. Because it was a small backyard, the motorcyclist was able to have a really big impact. Now, if we take the entire prairie of the United States and we look at the flower population, and we take a motorcyclist and we drive them through a section of the prairie that's as big as your backyard, well, that's not going to make a hill of beans difference in the genetic makeup of the population of the entire prairie. So that's why small populations are subject to genetic drift. And the 2 associated terms, the first one is founder effect. Here's a little population of insects. Something happens. Maybe it's a rainstorm, maybe whatever, and it washes everybody away but 4 little red insects. Doesn't mean those red insects were more fit for the environment. Maybe a kid was riding their bike and killed all the bugs except for the 4. And these bugs are going to reproduce. And the new population is going to have a different diversity than the original population simply due to chance because it was a small population. Additionally, the idea of bottleneck effect, something happens. We've got great diversity in our population. There's some sort of crisis. Maybe it's forest fire. Maybe it's an earthquake and part of the ground caves in. Maybe it's a motorcycle riding through a field. Whatever it is, only a few survive. And the ones that survive the bottlenecking events are going to start the new population, and it often doesn't reflect the diversity of the original population. So the allele frequencies change, not because one is more fit than the other. It's just random chance events. If you're interested and need a little more clarification, here's an Amoeba Sister video on genetic drift. It's actually a pretty good one, but you don't have to watch it and you don't have to fill out any questions, but if you need it, it's there. So in summary, genetic drift affects small populations. It is random events that change the genetic makeup of small populations, and it can lead to a loss of variation. And this loss of variation, there are 2 alleles for every trait. Let's say the trait is height, big T is tall, little t is short. Genetic drift can actually cause harmful alleles to become fixed. And that just simply means instead of having a big T and a little t, the big T is gone, and maybe the little t causes a disease, and that's the only thing in the population. The most important takeaways from this slide are the 3 in red. Okay. We also said that gene flow can affect genetic variation, and it tends to reduce differences between population. Here's the cover of a Time magazine from a couple years ago, which said America is moving towards a more heterozygous, if you will, a more blended look. Where there are going to be less light-skinned people, fewer dark-skinned people. We're all eventually going to be medium toned. Our hair and our eyes are going to be medium. There won't be really light eyes and really dark eyes because our populations are blending. We have people from different parts of the globe coming together, and they're sharing genes. That's gene flow. So let's talk about natural selection. And the 3 types of natural selection, we said that nature chooses, and natural selection is the only influence that consistently results in adaptive evolution or adaptive radiation. Maybe you got to this in Biology 1. I can't remember last year, sophomores, if you did or not, but here's a graph of the original population. Darwin says that in every population, there's variation. Some are lighter, some are darker, whatever. Maybe it's bird beaks, smaller, larger, whatever. There's variation. In directional natural selection, nature is favoring one extreme phenotype. So here is the original population, and something's happened in the environment such that the darker over here have an advantage. And then over time, the entire population is going to reflect that darker change, maybe like the lava flows. Or you watch the video about the peppered moths. The Industrial Revolution happened, the environment changed, there was variation in the population, and over time, the darker moths had an advantage. In disruptive natural selection, here's your original population, there's variation. Something happens to select against the average and for both extremes. I always like to think about bird beaks. Maybe the medium-sized food in an environment disappears, and those medium-sized beaked birds, they have beaks that are too big for the teeny tiny seeds, but their beaks aren't big enough for the great big seeds, and they all die. And before too long, the population is going to reflect small beaked birds and large beaked birds. And lastly, the 3rd type of natural selection is stabilizing, where nature is selecting for the average phenotype. So in the original population, there's variation. Something happens and nature is selecting for the average. The example I like to use for this one is human birth rate, not rate, weight. I believe that if we were all together and I could ask each one of you what you weighed when you were born, the vast majority of us, 122 of us, the vast majority of us would say something between 6 and 8 pounds. Now, I gave birth to 2 children under 6 pounds, but thanks to modern medicine, they are still with me. So some of you may be in that category. There is always in every class one person that was a ginormous baby, and maybe you were born by C-section or whatever, but thanks to modern medicine, you got out safely and your mom survived. But think about like the Middle Ages when a baby was born 2 or 3 months early and weighed 1.5 pounds. That baby wasn't going to make it. Or think about the baby whose mother had gestational diabetes and she just fed sugar, sugar, sugar to her child. And that child was growing in the tummy, just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And when it came time to get born, the baby couldn't get out. And then the mother died because the baby couldn't get out. And it was a or maybe they tried to cut the baby out and the mother bled to death and the baby still died because of all the pressure. So before modern medicine, nature selected for the average birth weight for babies because those babies tended to survive best. So natural selection plays a key role in adaptive evolution. This is also called adaptive radiation, which is also called divergent evolution, where one ancestor gives rise to many unrelated or less and less related species. Because environments change, adaptive evolution or adaptive radiation is a continuous process. Okay, just as a reminder, we've already talked about this. Sexual selection is natural selection in which generally, but not always, the female is the selective pressure for a specific trait. Because the peahens were so crazy about those beautiful feathers, all of the males in the population ended up with the really fancy tail feathers. Because why? The ones with the tail feathers got the ladies and they had the babies. And the ones without the tail feathers, they didn't have any babies and pass on their DNA. So if we are becoming or we're losing variation, especially in the United States in terms of our phenotype, how do we preserve it? Well, because we're diploid organisms, that means we have two alleles for every trait. So some of us can be heterozygous for a trait. We can show the dominant phenotype, but we can have the heterozygous allele. And in some areas, there's something called the heterozygote advantage. Let's take a look at this. This is a map of where malaria occurs. Okay, malaria is a bloodborne disease that is carried by mosquitoes. Okay, that's awful. Well, interestingly enough, people who are heterozygous for the sickle cell trait, okay, so sickle cell disease causes your red blood cells to be sickle shaped and they get stuck on each other and they clump up and they cause pain and they cause strokes and it can ultimately lead to death. But if you're heterozygous for the trait, you're going to have some normal red blood cells and some sickle red blood cells. And it's going to be less of a problem. You're not going to be sick, but it's also going to give you some resistance to malaria. How bizarre, right? So if you're homozygous dominant and you have nothing but good normal shaped red blood cells, if you live in Africa, you're likely to get malaria and you're going to die. If, of course, you have sickle cell disease, you're going to get a clot and you're probably going to die. But if you're heterozygous, you're neither going to die from sickle cell disease, nor will you die from malaria. That would be an example of heterozygote advantage. So that concludes the rest of this PowerPoint for chapter 23, I think. I think it was 21. But on this PowerPoint, I'm going to let you look through. The rest of these are clicker questions. Every question is followed by the answer on the next page. So that's going to be on the PDF PowerPoint that's going to be uploaded on Schoology. And I encourage you to go through that and test your knowledge of this topic.